What can Germany do? Same thing. Want to create a nation of people that cares about humanity. You know what I mean? Like this should be the common maybe result there. If we truly create a world that people care about each other as humans, that you're not just gonna start killing each other. I think that would be a really good world to live in. That we have learned from this history that
Welcome to a new episode of the podcast Decolonial Memories. I'm Thomas Fuß. Today I have the honor and pleasure to talk to Neema Komba. She is a poet, writer, and researcher from Tanzania. Dear Neema Komba, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. You're a poet, writer, and researcher. Your current novel project deals with Mkomanile, a leading female fighter in the Maji-Maji War of Resistance against the Germans. Could you tell us a little bit about this person? What makes her special?
Thank you so much, Thomas. It's great to be here. Um, well, in 1902, sorry, 1905 to 1907, maybe all the way to 1908, there was a fierce resistance against the German colonial project in many communities in Tanzania, in southern Tanzania especially. Many ethnic groups and maybe nations at that time resisted. And this was the first time in history that there was collaboration between the various ethnic groups that previously might have been even at war with each other in history, but to resist colonial rule, they resisted and collaborated in their resistance in the sense that they all had a common enemy, but also common goal for freedom of these territories. So this is something that was really inspiring to think about. And of course, I've always known about Maji Maji War, and we've studied it in our school. But I think the way we studied it, two things were missing. The first one was that the place of women was not really discussed that much. Of course, in general, just the people who participated in the resistance, it's brushed over, and unfortunately this is also part of colonial legacy as well in our education system. A lot of our education system, like curriculum at that time when I was in school at least, was inherited from the British, and they didn't want another resistance, so they dumbed it down as much as they possibly could to make it less inspiring, to make it very minor detail, uh, almost a nonsensical war if you would think about it. This resistance, how did these people believe that bullets could turn into water? But they took out very essential parts of what this resistance was, and there were some spiritual elements to it, but it was a very interesting and very inspiring resistance, really. And there was a lot of things going on in the community during the resistance and before, of course. So I think I wanted to sort of get into the complexity of it, that we were not able to reach in our schooling, at least, to really dig deep into it, to learn more about the era, to learn more about the people, to learn more about their motivations. And of course, there is the brutal German colonial rule, but there was this other side where it was the people who had a lot of courage and a lot of heart and a lot of, let's say, they had and a lot of conviction about who they were and what kind of freedom they deserved, that they refused to be subjugated by anybody, and they would resist even to the death for their freedom. So I really found that very inspiring. So I wanted to have that fuller picture. And in the telling of the story as well, I wanted to have the role of women, and they were quite there were many women who participated in the resistance as leaders in some situations, as spiritual leaders, and as military leaders as well. In different communities, there were different women. I think in Muhoro there was Nawanga, who was a spiritual leader. In Nandete, where the resistance began, there was Namtabila Naupunda, who carried the pot of Maji Maji War, or the pot of the Maji Maji potion from what is it called, from Kinjekitile's homeland, and from Garambe, and carried that pot to Nandete and initiated the fighters, and that's when the Maji Maji War started. So women were central to this resistance in many ways. And of course, in Ungoni, Mkomanile is the sub-chief that received the portion for the first time from Omari Kinjala, who came from Lindi, and so he brought this portion to the Ngoni, and she was the one who kind of like brought her, maybe the rest of the leadership of the Ngoni leadership into the war through this portion as well. So women played a very critical role in the leadership, but also as well as the community struggled. Also, they were an integral part into how they were able to fool the maybe colonial soldiers in some situations, and how to help the fighters hide properly. They would feed them. They did a lot of work in the resistance, but their contribution, unfortunately, in this patriarchal world, is often dismissed or ignored altogether. And so I really wanted to bring that story to the front line.
So besides highlighting the role of the female fighters against German colonial rule, do you also have some personal motivation? What made you move into this subject?
Absolutely. So before I wrote this novel, initially I wanted to write a story about my family before this novel project came to be. And my own family is, well, on my mother's side, I am from the Matengo ethnic group. We do not have this typical sort of monarchy leadership where you have a chief and like one royal family. We have clan-based leadership, so we didn't really have like the whole group having one leader, but different clans had like different types of leaderships. And in the place where my mother's family came from, it is called Litembo. In 1902, first in this place the missionaries came in the beginning.
Which society, which missionary society was that?
I think it's the Order of Saint Benedict.
From St. Ottilien, from southern Germany, from Bavaria.
Yeah, so the missionaries came, Catholic missionaries specifically, and this was the case in the south, that the missionaries that came were Catholic missionaries, especially from southern Germany. And I guess we were kind of like late comers in that sense. This was an area that Christianity hadn't spread at all, and in some parts Islam had spread, and in some parts it hadn't at all. So like where I came from, for example, no outside religion had been kind of like brought in so far. So they built a school, and I think they built a church and started their missionary work. And initially it was kind of going okay. People were, I don't know, interested, or I don't know what happened in that situation, because it was only a school and mostly maybe for children. So people didn't see much harm in this at that time. But then the colonial government decided to catch up and start an administrative area there and collect taxes and everything. And this is not
the German colonial government.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So in that situation, then the people were like, this is not what we said yes to. You wanted to come and say, like spread news about, God and religion. That was fine. If you wanted to bring a school, we thought that was fine to learn how to read and write and everything. That was definitely okay. at that point in time, but to bring a rule that is against how we live, to bring this mandatory taxation and everything, this is not what we signed up for. So the people revolted and they burned down the school and told them, well, get out. Burn down the school and whatever they had brought. So they said, we no longer want you in our space.
So that would be the year 1902
Yes.
that this happened.
Yeah, this happened in 1902. And of course, after that, the German colonial government, they had brought troops in to quash the resistance. It wasn't such a severe armed resistance as it would be. They just thought, well, we no longer want you, so this is not your area, just leave. And of course, it wasn't received with the same, maybe, same intention or something like that, or same reciprocity in that sense. Like, sorry.
Like there was not massive, let's say, armed resistance
Well,
by the community.
initially, yes, but of course they did arm themselves, and they had, the Litembo area is very mountainous and very rocky, so the people stayed on the mountain slopes, and they had all the weapons and everything, and were throwing rocks downwards, and so that would sort of keep the people at bay, the kind of like the troops that were coming in. But we have a very sort of like talking culture. So talking is kind of like sacred. So if you have any problem with your neighbor or your family member or anybody, talking it out is like the most sacred thing you could do. So whoever was helping them sort of knew this about us, and they said, we want to talk it out. So us being us, we were like, okay, let's talk it out. And that was an ambush, so they massacred all the clan leaders there, including my great-great-grandfather. Yeah. So all the clan leaders were massacred on that day. It's a very terrible day, and the way they remember it for many years, because the council or baraza was on top of this hill, and on top of this really big rock. The whole area is very rocky, and underneath it there was a sort of like a stream or a small river that was flowing. It was bloodied, and for many years people did not drink from that river or use that river, just because of what happened. It had been full of blood from the people, that were killed.
So are there, let's say, specific memory practices today by your family or by the community?
So when this happened, on this particular day that they massacred the clan leaders, including my great-grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, my great-great-grandmother left with her family. And this is what happened to a lot of the people whose heads of the families were killed. They all went back to their maternal places. So she fled with her children, and she was also pregnant at the time. She fled to her maternal side of the family, to her. And when she got there, she started over, knowing that there is this entire thing that had been cut, so they could no longer stay there. Not only out of fear, but the clan leadership at that point in time, the leadership went to another clan in a way. So their cousins took over, so the baraza. So they almost had no place anymore in that space. But also there was a lot of fear because the families witnessed their family members getting killed right there in front of them. So there was a lot of fear. But when our great-great-grandmother moved from Litembo to Kipololo, where they settled, our graveyard is our people bury either on the very top of the mountain or in a very thick forest. We tend to bury in sort of these plots that are, I think they're very alive because it's a thick forest, but we in my mom's side of the family we bury on top of a mountain because it's very mountainous and very rocky, so there are not so many places that are like, you know, maybe like, I don't know, how do you say this in English? uh, but there's not so many places where it's like just easy to make a grave site. So we do it on the top of the mountain or in a very sort of like secluded forest, uh, where you can go there and pay your respects, but not really so close to to where the people are residing. Um, so on my mom's side of the family, where the grave site is on top of the mountain, that village, all the other graves face in another direction except ours. Ours face looking towards Litembo. And every time we go to the grave site to just like clean the graves and say some prayers, which is very traditional in that part of the country as well. Every time we go there, this is the story that we were being told. So,
Like even as a little child, you would hear this story about the German violence and repression.
yes, so not very little, but when I got old enough to be able to go to the gravesite, very young children are not really supposed to go around to the gravesite. But
What age would that be, more or less?
I don't know, maybe 8, 9, maybe not that even, maybe even 11, probably. So when we went to the gravesite, the first time I went to the graveyard was when my grandfather passed away. So that was 1998 already. So it's, so that was the first time. Before that, I wasn't able to go because I was too young. But after my grandfather passed away, and we had gone to see where he had been buried, he had passed away. I wasn't there during the burial, so we went during the holiday, Christmas holiday, to see the gravesite where he was buried. And when we were there, then my uncle started explaining to us. So it was like, now I know it's a normal thing that we do every time we're there. When you go to visit the gravesite, you start from the first person in your family that has been buried there. And we start with the great-great-grandmother's, her name is Teresia Lupoka. And so we start with her graves, and hers faces normal direction, but all the Kinundas that follow, that were buried there, all the people in my family that had passed, their graves faced a very different direction because they face towards where they came from. And this is to remember that we're here because we had been, we were forced to leave our home because of the massacre and because of the killing of our great-grandfather. And for many years, we actually believed that his head was taken by the Shermans. This was the story that was passed down. But so that was definitely something that we always like had to remember every time we went. And we would go through all the graves and, you know, of the family, but we would always have our graves face a different direction. And I think that was a very physical way to remember what happened. But of course, there's also a very interesting story that my mom told me when I was growing up, was that because they had been told this story, that the Kinunda clan was forced to scatter after this massacre because most of the leaders were killed, they grew up knowing that wherever they go, if they met someone else by the same name, that they were family. And so they're like told as they leave home, when you're going to school or somewhere or moving out to another town, if you go there and you meet another Kinunda, we were scattered and separated, but we're family. So I think this is something that in my family, we have sort of reformed a lot of bonds out of this. When my mom was in middle school at that time, she went to school a bit far from where she lived, and she met a girl there, and they were very good friends. And then her father came to visit when she was sick, the friend's father. And she saw my mom and looked at her and said, "Whose child are you?" And my mom started explaining where they're from, and he said, "You're my child." Mm-hmm. We were separated at this, so this is a story that every family almost tells their own people, and then when they meet somewhere else, and they kind of like rediscover this bond. And this kind of continued to be the case when she was also in secondary school, met some other people there who share the name, and they reconnected, and those people have been very close to our family, as though we have kind of grown up in the same village, but we haven't. And so I have a lot of like uncles, and my mom calls a lot of people brother and sister, for example, and they have this very strong family bond, even though it's really by name, if that makes sense, like the name that they have, that they carried, and they share this common history that our families were scattered here because of the massacre. Yeah.
Coming back to the remains of your great grandfather, would you assume that the head was taken to Germany?
So it was pretty common practice at that time to take the head of my great grandfather's name was Tekateki. That was his kind of common name, and they took at that time whenever they had like did a massacre somewhere, or there was like a revolt, to quash any rebellion, they would cut the heads of the leaders to instill this fear as well on the people. So it was common practice. So it's only natural that maybe this was something that they believed. But when I was doing the research for my novel, and I will get back to this one. This was the family story that I wanted to write, but I ended up doing a much different story than I thought. But when I went to visit Litembo for the first time, I had never been there. Like this, there was this kind of sense of like, this is your home now. So we didn't really go back to that place that had very painful memories in a way. I think maybe my so in my growing up, we didn't visit that much at all. And also we still had this new place that we were settling in. So that was also home. So we went to visit that home mostly. And so when I was there for doing my research for the novel, and I went with my uncle, actually, the one who always recites these memories whenever we visit the graveyard. And when we got there, we found that there was a mass grave of the people that were slain that on that day.
How did you find it?
Through the community leaders, and
Okay.
also.
But there's no sign indicating there. It's just sort of the oral knowledge.
No, they don't have a monument yet, but they have like but it's a place that they have preserved, and there are also, it continued to be a grave site for other people as well, but there is this space that is like indicated that this is a mass grave, that these people were buried here, and their names are preserved, and including my grandfather's
They're
name.
written up on a sign there on this at the site.
Yeah. So, and they're mentioned, and we read their names and everything, and it was a very somber moment. My uncle had never been there and wasn't even aware of this, so he took off his hat and had like a moment, and just really just had like kind of like a sigh that somehow he has found something that's been lost from him. So that was a very maybe sobering moment, and he thanked me, which was interesting that I brought him there. I didn't really think that me trying to write a story would bring this kind of closure to my uncle. And of course, the monument is yet to be built, and the community is trying to create this memorial so that like it's very clear that this is where the people were buried, and like maybe make it more. So.
But you're not actively searching for the skull of your great grandfather. Is that correct?
I hadn't really thought about it up at that point. There is some possibility from the memory of the people who are there now that there were possibility that they were buried, all of them together. So it's not clear if the head was taken or not. I'm not really sure that if that's the case. I tried to ask some researchers, but very fairly recently, that I asked, did they have any information about this? If there were any remains that were taken during this period, could they know something about it? well, this person that I spoke to, as far as they knew, they didn't know, they had no information really. And apparently there is not so much information about the human remains that there are here. So I don't really know if that's a path. I hadn't really thought about it. I think for me it was kind of like having this knowledge that at least part of him, if it's all of him or part of him is buried in this place, perhaps that for my family might have been like consoling enough even to know that this place of memory stays. But I think we have really memorialized the whole thing in our stories and how we have created and recreated ourselves as people and as a family. It kind of like lives through us in a way, even without knowing. In some way, there is something that is in your bones that if I would say that you sort of, it sits with you and stays with you, um, and and that is both the sort of the sadness of it, but also the resilience that of surviving and rebuilding and reclaiming who you are after such a loss. And I think that that is also part of the story as well. That if I'm able to find out more information, I don't know what information there would be, or if the remains are here or not. If I'm able to find out, that would be really. I think it would be really good for my family to know. But if I don't find out, I think it's also like, I don't know. I hadn't really thought too much about it, to be honest. Like, in terms of like, who am I is defined by so many more things in some way. So I feel that there is a part of me that would like to know, but if I also don't know, there is a part of me that will always know. That it lives in my soul, maybe.
Coming back to your novel, when will it be out? When can we read it?
That's a tough question. Actually, coming back to before I say when it will be out, maybe I should say my story, when I started writing this, I wanted to write my family story. But I actually realized that this is a story that many families share. It was a very personal story, very personal story, very painful story for my family. But also, of course, it's a story of resilience and surviving. But it's a story that a lot of families in Tanzania share. And there had been many very violent, maybe ways that they squashed rebellion and in many different communities. So it's a shared story. And so I think that's why I thought, instead of writing only about my family story as if it's this unique story, is to try and weave the story into a larger sort of resistance and see how different communities and different families kind of lived through it. And I think that was really important. Now, when will the novel be out? That's a story that I have no answer to. I have finished writing. I was very fortunate to get grant to write the first draft from the Miles Moreland Foundation, which supports African writing. And so I finished writing the first draft through that grant, but then I still have to do a lot of revisions and getting it to sort of to shape. And that has taken much longer than I actually. Well, I don't know how long it takes to write a novel. It's my first novel, so I don't know how long it's supposed to take. But the revision part was actually very tough. When I went to visit all these different communities, every place sort of, there is a weight that came with it that I hadn't expected. You know, I'm just writing a fictional story. I'm not really I'm not a historian, I'm not a researcher, I don't belong to any sort of like institution, and this is like my first novel. I want it to be really meaningful, and I wanted it to be a novel that reclaims this part of identity, of our identity, that I feel has been stripped away from, not only from the way that we have been taught in school, but from the way that the world tends to view people from my part of the world, that we are somehow not courageous, or like something is something always kind of like, there's a lot of racist notions towards how Africans are in that sense, you know. And I, I, I guess it was sort of my way of saying, listen, we are awesome people. We're resilient. We have fought, but we are also we are we. We are free people, and we've always been free people. We've never wanted to be subjugated by anybody. We've the ideals that we want to live in this world. We have our people have died for them. So I wanted to really honor that part of my history, and I want part of my own self in a way, and find out a lot more about it as well. But in every community that I went to, I felt that there was this there was this please tell our story. And that was really heavy, sort of in a way that even though they knew I was writing a novel, and I said, you guys realize this is fiction. I will make up stuff. and there was this kind of like, can you please tell our story? So it became to have all these different communities, and as you know about the Maji Maji War, there was a lot of different communities that participated. And how do you tell a story for each community that in a way that honors them, but also how can you tell a story that is still like exciting to read, because you know, like, you want to read a story that is cohesive, that is like exciting, you want to get into the story. So there was this kind of like trying to weave this, maybe trying to fit myself in a way that I'm honoring the communities, but also like still delivering a good story. And I think that balance has been, in a way, maybe the one thing that makes it really hard to go through the revisions, because I'm thinking about, okay, if I cut this character, so the cutting of the characters out of the story, for example, has been like one of the most difficult things. I take them out, they come back, take them out again, they come back. Like, how do you tell this story? It's such a big story for the community, and perhaps not much. I mean, there has been some work on it, like, but still, every time you go, there is this expectation from the community that you would this would truly make us be seen in this light that I felt very heavy, I suppose.
So in the next section, we will come back to some specific conversations and encounters you have had in the Maji Maji affected area.
Okay.
So let's talk about some of the specific encounters and conversations you have had with communities in the areas affected by the Maji Maji War of Resistance.
I haven't managed to go to all places, I will say this, but the places that I went, I think the stories were, it was really nice to be in those communities, even though briefly. I spent quite a lot of time in the in Songea area, and I went to visit Kitanda, the like the maybe the homeland of Mkomanile, and where she actually was the sub-chief, the Nduna of the area. So I went to Kitanda, and I got to talk to a lot of different people, and I'm very grateful actually to Professor Bertram Mapunda, he's been a historian and archaeologist and working with Maji Maji for a very long time. So when I started writing, I reached out to him and said, hey, I'm going to do this, um, and so he was like very gracious to share a lot of context with me. So I was kind of like going there with like a lot of already like, oh, you could talk to this person and this person. And of course the Maji Maji Museum in Songea was very, very helpful to help me meet a lot of these different community leaders. So that was one side. But of course there's something also missing in the story. And it's both in the official accounts and also even in the remembering, because a lot of the it's been many years now, and some of the stories have been lost in the way. So and in some way, and this happens when you talk about sort of people who have become almost mythical figures, that the human of who were they, what were they like, what were they at this kind of like basic human level, not this like elevated level of like heroes and almost martyrs, and well, not almost, but martyrs in that sense.
So we're talking about the historical period of 1905 to 1907, more or less, right? The
Yeah.
Maji Maji
Yes.
War.
Yeah. So in that the stories of these people as kind of like who are they at like a basic human level, they are obscured by by the sort of like their martyrdom and their heroism. And as a writer, I am interested in the human or person as much as they became the heroes, but I want to also find out like who were they, what did they like, what did they eat, that kind of stuff. And I felt that was a huge gap that I have to imagine a lot myself. That's where the imagination has to come to sort of humanize them in a sense, because in the books, if you read like official accounts, they would just mention a name, and sometimes it's not even like in a good way. They're like, if it's a German written account, it's a horrible representation of who they are. And on this other hand, because they were martyred at the end, they were killed, we have elevated them already to this other plane that the human there is kind of like missing. So I feel like in that way, as a storyteller, that part I have to sort of recreate. Who are they as humans? And it's been both exciting and terrifying, because then these are people's heroes. How do you write about them without knowing enough about them? And so that was one of the sort of maybe tough things to talk about. But I think the communities have had a way to remember, and they tell them in these stories of the people. Sometimes the stories are almost fantasy, because in a way that they lived a while ago. It's not been that long, honestly, but still there is a sense of like their story being our own story of redemption in a way. So there is that sort of, I don't know the actual word to say here, but there is this, maybe there's a reverence that comes out of the communities, not just for these leaders, but just for the people at the time, and this part of their history, that they really want to honor it because it is something that means a lot to them. But of course, there is also this sense of some stories lost that I have to figure out how to find them. And I think that lost part, in some cases you know what you lost, but in some cases it's also you don't know what you lost, and you're sort of figuring it out together in these discussions. And sometimes the loss comes through, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you figure out this is what we lost, sometimes you don't, but you still feel it. And I don't know, that's, if I'm explaining it in a way that makes any sense, but yeah.
Do the communities affected by the Maji Maji War, they remember on their own, or are there some larger conversations where the different communities bring their experiences together?
I think this is something quite maybe beautiful about the Maji Maji communities, is that many of them still carry out these memorials that they do. I think they have every year, they do some memorial.
It's like ceremonies.
It's a ceremony.
On a set date.
Yeah, on a set date. I know there is one that happens in Songea every year. This Maji Maji, I think it's a few days or maybe a week-long thing. They have all this kind of rituals that they do. It's like a proper memorial. And I know there is something that happens in Nandete, where the Maji Maji War started in the Matumbi community. But I think there is also sometimes a disconnect in a way, because there are so many other communities that have lost, not just with Maji Maji, because there's been other there's been other resistances and that were also violent, that people died, but maybe there's a lot more focus on this Maji Maji because the communities were already doing something. I know there are other parts in the north that also do something, but I think what could improve, and it's starting to, is the communities broadening this to it not just being about Maji Maji and about our ancestors, and it being like there was who else resisted and who else gets to be honored. I think it can be a wider conversation and a wider participation maybe.
So do the media in Tanzania talk about it, report on this?
I think when they do the memorials, yes, they would sometimes show it like on the media. I haven't lived in Tanzania in the past few years, so I might miss the day today, but I know that they report on it fairly okay. But yeah, but maybe like it's a commemoration and who was there, but Maji Maji is not something that's not remembered by people. I think this is something that maybe people remember Maji Maji more than any other resistance. I think that's to my knowledge like the most remembered resistance in the country, and also the most commemorated one. In some way, it fits the story of what Tanzania wanted to become in post-independence, that it was where different groups united, different people with different leadership, they all united to fight for a common good, to fight for a common country, something that hadn't existed prior to that. Different communities did resistance, but it was never like something so unified. And I think it fits our sort of national story and what we hoped to become as a nation post-independence, that we wanted to be a united country. We wanted to be a country that was not divided along ethnic or religious lines, for that matter. So it fits that national story, and I think it's a story that has been venerated. But I think as with many stories, it's complicated, and sometimes the complications get lost. And so if you try to make a very sort of maybe simple tale of unity without acknowledging different complexities and acknowledging many different communities, so it becomes a bit abstract, and I think in abstracting anything you could lose quite a bit.
So when you talk to the communities affected by the Maji Maji War, did you hear specific expectations or demands towards the German side, like return of ancestral remains or cultural belongings or reparatory justice?
Of course. I think it's the conversation of what people want is sometimes personal, and then and the personal can take over. When you talk about, for example, human remains, this is a family matter. It's not like a collective situation. A particular person from a particular family who has a specific relation, where they need to be buried, how they need to be honored, that is a different process, and it can feel extremely personal. So what that family or the relatives of that person would want from this would be extremely clear, that this is what I want. But then you would have a community that has been affected. Maybe not everybody's family was taken. As you're known with Maji Maji, it was a genocide. Over 300,000 people estimated died because of the scorched earth campaign, where they burned villages and then they burned farms and starved people. Pretty much a terrible situation. So in that situation, that community deserves a different type of justice, not just the return of remains. They talk about it. So some people would talk about reparations, and some people don't know what they want even. It's still so heavy, and I think as a country and as a collective, we're still dealing with it. We're still trying to process it, it hasn't been that long in many ways. It feels like it's been many years and some things are getting lost about the stories, but it's also not been that long and the trauma still lives in the people. So I think there is this kind of like, some people are still figuring it out. So asking them, what do you want? Well, they're just figuring it out. Sometimes it's also very difficult. So I think there is like a collective processing that needs to happen internally, perhaps, that can help people figure out what exactly they want as a whole. But individually and in families, there is like very specific things that families might want to be able to get closure. But in terms of like the experiences of the collective, not just for the Maji Maji war itself, but also for the entire colonial project, that's a bigger conversation, and I think we need a little bit of a collective reckoning, if so to speak.
So what role could the National Restitution Committee play, which Tanzania government has set up a few years ago?
That's a very tough question for me to answer because in some way, I don't know if I know enough about the restitution committee that has been set up and what they are trying to do. I think they have to broaden their picture. This is my assumption. Broaden their picture in the sense that perhaps besides working with the families who lost people, and there are families who know exactly like what happened to the human remains of their loved ones during Maji Maji, and maybe there is like a path for them for something. But I think in a larger kind of conversation, we have to ask ourselves as a people, what exactly are we trying to do with this history in a way, and also what do we hope to achieve as a people? Because if you do it, unfortunately, if you do it in a way that robs people of the dignity and does not really honor not just the sacrifice, but the true spirit of these people as really resilient, as really like defiant, as really strong, if you don't honor it in this conversation, I feel like you're doing a disservice. And in any case, you don't want to engage in any kind of conversation that takes away that. That only tells the story of us as victims, the ones who got killed in a way, but doesn't tell the real story in a way of the people, and doesn't really honor their sacrifice. I think it's always tricky. So having a conversation without really like affirming this identity is, for me, it would be terrible in some ways. So even when I have to, I could only say about this from a personal point of view. For example, if I have to engage with an institution about this, there has to be very much clarity about who I am in this situation, and if there is any sort of, if it comes from like with a power imbalance in the discussion, which is almost inherent here, it has to be addressed, this power imbalance, and there is no doing each other's favors here. The story has to be very clear, and my position as in this situation has to be met with this kind of like respect that is demanded, I think. So could the restitution committee ensure that? I hope they could, but I think there are also people, so then the colonial legacy hasn't left anybody.
So in the next section, we will turn to the German role as the former colonial power. Talking about Germany addressing colonial legacies, in November 2023, German President Steinmeier went to Songea to ask for forgiveness for the German colonial violence. What's your view of that act there? How do you assess?
Honestly, that apology for me was very upsetting. I wasn't particularly impressed by it. It was mere words, if I would say. And I think I've come to think about it as two things that sort of make me say this. There has been no material effort in repairing anything. So just saying sorry, it almost felt like sorry if I hurt you. That's how I felt. Because he, if he was a person, like if we're having a conversation as individuals who have no institutions and no power behind us, an apology like that could be like, oh, you've really thought about this from a human level. But he is a president. He comes with, he represents an institution, a country, and saying just this sorry without any material anything in a community that you can tell that they have been affected, in a community that I find that very, very disturbing, that there is no material anything to back up this apology. What does it mean? What am I supposed to take out of it? Like, okay, so you're sorry, but what does that sorry mean? Country to country, what does that actually mean? And what am I supposed, as a person who has been, whose family maybe has been affected, but also like as a person who lives in a country that there is like incredible imbalance in because the extraction of this economies and of these countries is what has led to the massive development in many ways of a lot of European countries. So what is this sorry even like doing in this day and age? It's 2020, it was 2025. So what did it?
2023 in
2023.
November.
Yeah. So how does this like, how does this in this day and age kind of like what does this apology mean? I mean, I keep thinking, for example, in terms of like the things that if a country continues to benefit from the same thing that they're sorry about, are they even sorry? Um, I always just think a very simple example is if I go to the Natural History Museum and I see the dinosaurs from Tendaguru, as a Tanzanian, I'm completely disconnected from this. It's classified as a cultural asset, I think, or something here in Germany.
A protected cultural asset, but where the bones come from Tanzania during the colonial rule.
Exactly. So in this situation, a school in Lindi, where the Tendaguru formations are, they have, if you think about it, is there even a road that goes there? Is the school, do the other schools equipped? This is in the interest of science. It's even like a science center that the children could learn about, not just these dinosaurs that like a person from a local person tells a person and then they do the digging. So it's like, how do you fathom this kind of like disconnect? And then you can say, I'm sorry, but here I have benefited from this all along and I will continue to benefit. I have no intention of sharing any benefits with you in the foreseeable future that I will tell you about. So it's really like, there is no materiality in the apology that I think needs to happen. If we're talking institution to institution, country to country, that cannot happen without this kind of sincerity and materiality that I'm talking about. But I guess the second part of this apology that I was disturbed by is that this was happening around the same time that also the Gaza occupation has been going on. Like there is like another genocide that is happening presently that we could take an actual stand here against the genocide today, from like prevent it from happening or stop it from continuing in a way. And so and I felt this was maybe this was something that was very, very, I don't know how to say this. I don't know how to say it, especially. It was a very sad situation because I felt like this is history. At a certain point, okay, we can talk about many things, but this is something that happened in the past that we should have learned from as a common humanity. So whether whether there is like something material or not material, whatever, but at least a lesson is something that we should come out of it with. We cannot change it, but we can learn from it in that way. And so, if we're making a stance against something that happened in the past and acknowledging that it was bad, but it's happening in the present and we are not doing something about the present, do we even mean that this thing in the past was bad? And I know this is a completely different community in that sense, but for me, this thread continues. Like the same thing that allowed this to happen then is what allows Gaza to happen. It's what allows this kind of continued imperial invasions to happen. Like if we said from history, like, okay, this shouldn't have happened. This was a genocide. This is bad. Can we take a stance in the present moment to prevent this genocide, So I felt like maybe it's the spirit of it that I needed, like, even if it was like, I don't know, I needed it to be, we've truly learned from the past, and that let's prevent this from happening. I am here now, and I would hope that this stops, and I would hope that the people that are in positions of power can at least speak to what's happening in this moment and call a spade and say, this is a genocide. Let's not make it happen again. And somehow, if we say that, if we do this and apologize for the past, then that apology means something. Even if it doesn't have anything material, it has action to prevent something happening in the future or in the present. So I felt like it was maybe a political moment to be seized, but not really a sincere moment. But this is my judgment of it. I don't know. I can't see someone's heart or anything, so I can only judge it based on possibly actions. And I don't know. The actions did not really convey sincerity, in my opinion, I guess.
Focusing on the Tanzania-Germany relationship and looking into the future, what would you like to see happening from the German government side to make this credible, this call or this ask for forgiveness?
I also don't know much about Germany, so maybe I could ask you, do you feel, for example, in Germany that there is enough maybe awareness and respect of this part of history in terms of like what happened in maybe in other parts of Africa during the colonization period, but also in Tanzania? Do you feel like this is something that in Germany, this is something that is at all talked about, or a part of like a reckoning of the society as well?
Well, no, I'm very critical of our German society. There's not enough awareness of the violent nature of German colonialism and colonial legacies. And with regard to the German government, I'm really lacking any credible step towards recognizing the historical responsibility, like we call for a national site, memorial site on colonialism. So we're still very much at the beginning of the road. So I fully take your point of criticism towards the Steinmeier visit. I would say exactly the same thing.
I suppose there is this kind of like, what can we do within our own communities and what can we do in sort of interacting between each other? Before we can even interact, I think we all need to be better educated, probably in some way. If the German side has no idea, like about, or maybe not no idea, but either being taught this history in a very different manner or not at all. And you have the Tanzanian community who have been shaped by the trauma of it, and also sort of there is a legacy of this that makes you feel less than or inferior or something. This is not a good meeting point. I would rather we didn't meet until we resolve our situation, and we are like, we come from this place where when we meet, we have all sort of have started at least a reckoning and a truth telling on both sides. The truth, not that favors anything, like that favors, what do you call it? Like if it favors the lion, kind of the hunt story. I don't know. I don't remember the idiom, but the point is, if we're meeting at a point where both sides have a certain level of ignorance, um, it's not going to be a good meeting point. There is not going to be a good exchange. The power imbalance continues. Everything continues. So, I guess there is some things that need to be happening in our communities individually, like separate from each other in a way. Um, and it's a reckoning that unfortunately I don't see that it's something that Germany can help me reckon with this, or as a Tanzanian can help you as a, like a German person to learn this. I feel like this is something that our communities have to kind of like first figure it out. What is wrong with the way we are teaching this? If we are not teaching it, how can we change the way we see this atrocity, to be more honest, more human, and acknowledge not just the complexities, but the humanity that gets lost in these conversations. But this is within ourselves, because it's really hard to start having these conversations together when I'm trying to figure it out. If I'm hurt and angry and everything, and immediately you put me into this and like, okay, now start talking. I feel like that might be quite tough because it's a collective thing as well. So like collectively, we deal. And then if we're intentional about it, this could happen. Have sort of wider conversations and deeper conversations, and reckon with the way people feel, but also remind. As for me as a Tanzanian, it's very critical that it doesn't. This is something that I want. It's something that I take pride in. That this resistance, this history. I take pride in the fact that I come from a people that would rather die than not be free. I think freedom is my utmost response. I have the responsibility to be free. Somebody died for this, and I want to, and I also want to also acknowledge that there is like some ideals and some sort of moral stance that comes with wanting to fight injustice, and I don't want to lose that part of myself and make it an exchange thing, like let's exchange money for it, or let's exchange. It's not something that I would rather see. I would rather we nurture this spirit, and like we kind of create this nation that everybody has that Maji spirit in them. Everybody has that spirit of resistance against oppression. That's what I want. We can create a better world that way, but that's the idealistic side of me. But yeah, then what can Germany do? Same thing. Want to create a nation of people that cares about humanity. You know what I mean? Like this should be the common maybe result there. If we truly create a world that people care about each other as humans, that you're not just gonna start killing each other. I think that would be a really good world to live in. That we have learned from this history that when we see each other as less than, when we see each other in this manner, if we're only extracting and we're not really respecting, we've learned, like we are seeing the consequences of our actions kind of like happening in real time. And then, but we are choosing to ignore this and sort of like, we can rush towards reconciling, but we haven't, if we don't change the core of the problem, like what caused us to get to this level, I don't really see that. And I think that can be done through more education on either sides, and sort of like thinking about what exactly is, what are the ideals that we want to uphold as humanity. And I think that is something we can kind of work together in that situation, without downplaying, without dismissing what happened.
You went to see the Tanzania exhibition at the Humboldt Forum yesterday. What's your opinion?
Oh, I feel bad to say this on record. It was, okay, it was an interesting exhibition, but it was almost out of place, if I could say.
Yes, please elaborate.
there is a very big disconnection between the exhibition of this space and the space with which houses it, but also even the people. When we arrived at the Humboldt Forum, I tried to ask this person about, because I was interested in the like human remains, and kind of online there wasn't a lot of information about it, and this person was like, well, maybe try this other place and this other place. And then I said, what about this Tanzanian exhibition? It's like, well, it's like a 2-room thing upstairs. You can just like walk through it. So I'm like, okay. So already this is the first picture I got painted, and then you walk up this like long escalators, this huge building, and there's different types of exhibitions, and then there is this space for the histories of Tanzania exhibition. And we get there, and of course the curators have really like, they put out a statement of like the curator's statement, and like how much care they took into like producing this work and everything. And there were some parts of the exhibition that were really, really beautiful. The sort of the architecture of the way that they did the displays and the videos that were recorded, and the sort of like, you could feel like there's a reverence to this in some way. But also now this is the disconnected part. The curators have taken a lot of care, that they've gotten permission or everything, and you could take off your shoes. You feel like they want you to really respect this. But the problem is, it's in this tiny space, in the context of this humongous space that doesn't care, if that makes any sense. Like, you're walking into this space, and the juxtaposition is like weird. I don't know. I don't want to be as that critical, because I've never organized an exhibition myself, but it felt very like, okay, so here I can take off my shoes, or I can wear this blue thing is to not step on the mats, okay. But then you have like the museum staff who are just walking around and looking, and there was one who like even did a little jump at the bit. And I'm like, the space that you want to say that you're creating has not really married with the rest of the space. So if this is like a respectful thing, it should be cohesive throughout. I think I think that disconnect was the most staggering in a way. So that's just like the and I don't want to say that I felt like the curators really cared for this, like almost like it centered the curator's point of view, that this is what we want you to see about this country. And then there was, which can be good and bad in a way. Some things get lost if it's too focused on the curator. But I felt their care. So in that case, I was like, wow, they really have taken time. However, the care gets really like, within the larger context, it's not just lost, it's almost ridiculous. Like, you're ridiculed by this extra amount of care in a space that does not care. So I felt that was like my initial kind of like reaction in a way. But it was also nice to see familiar faces. I saw a couple of people that I know, also people that I'd interviewed that were in some of the videos, and then I learned that some people who were involved in the project that I even know them. Like, for example, Amani, who did some of the drawings, I know him, and Nick, who took the videos. So I kind of like learned later that this was the case, but
so Amani Abate and Nicholas Calvin.
Yes, yes, yeah. So Nick's a very good friend of mine, so it was kind of like, well, kind of nice to see people's work that I knew, but in some way, I don't know. Perhaps if they had featured the creators, not just the creators also kind of like would speak of the experience, that would have maybe created a more sort of different level of engagement in a way, without just, there was a bit of a disconnection for me in that way. But then the exhibition itself, I guess you want to call something like the title. Sometimes it can be larger than what it means, and I think there is limitations because they create the history of Tanzania based off of these objects. So the objects are the focus. uh, you can sort of sugarcoat it as much as it can, but if the objects are the focus, the chances are you're telling a very limited story of a country that is so vast and so complex and so many communities and so many things. And if the objects are also objects that have been taken from this place, stolen, looted in that sense, the story that you're going to tell is really, it's a story of maybe conquest and a story of not the history of Tanzania, but the history of Tanzania in contact with other people, as if our history doesn't exist outside of contact. And that for me was like, okay, I didn't learn any sort of new history basically being here, but being a Tanzanian. But it could be that this exhibition was not meant for a Tanzanian, right? So I cannot look at this exhibition and say that this exhibition was trying to speak to me as a Tanzanian, but perhaps it was meant for someone else. But maybe the point that I would say out of this is like that the disconnection there within the space and the intention of the curators, the sort of like, maybe I would have liked to see more of the creators also like being featured in saying what this process meant for them as well, not just the curators. And I also still think the history was not the history of Tanzania. It was the history of Tanzania in contact with either Germans and other people. So like showing, I don't know, showing that we have been part of the world in some way, which is very condescending. As a like, of course we have the world has, nobody has ever existed in well, I guess there are some communities that have existed in isolation, but not many. Many communities have had contact, but their history is not contact. The history is complex. So perhaps calling it something different would have like alleviated that part of it, because it sets an expectation if you say histories of Tanzania, like, and I'm thinking like, okay, I'm gonna learn so much new things here, but then it's like, oh yeah, look, they had contact with China and with whoever, and here then they had colonization. Like it still felt like this kind of very limiting part of history. Like it all was good, then colonization, then independence. Like it's not really history in my opinion, but I'm also not a historian, and maybe I've been taught to not dislike like what history I learned from my grandfather. So,
You mentioned ancestral or human remains. Will you do further work on the ancestors that were taken to Germany during colonial rule?
I don't know if it's further work on the ancestors, but I've been curious about this, and I was especially curious about the Mkwawa, skull of Mkwawa and the returning of it. And I read a lot of like, at that time, a lot of like New York Times and the New Yorker were reporting on this in like 1920 something. And so I was quite curious about what happened with this. And this was like my first point of maybe interest. And of course learning about a lot of the human remains that have been housed here, not just from like this kind of like resistances and sort of killing of leaders, but also during the time when they were doing that research. Is it on, what is it called, the cranium theory, trying to prove cranium theory?
Yeah, the pseudoscience,
which is a horrible time in history where people would, and it was different people would bring the skulls to be, I guess, to be studied, and they would sell them or something. And so there was a lot of human remains that were taken in that context as well. So there is like also there's a lot of human remains that just came from different places, different people. And so reading about it, and also just the way this was done, especially when they were doing this, like the pseudoscience that to prove that we're lesser than in some way. It was so horrific. And this was done by, I guess, anyone who could just hack someone's head. And I was reading about it at that time that, well, at some point they had too many maybe male skulls. So they're like, now we want women. So then this encourages people to go and start killing women and taking their their heads there. And then then no, now we need children. It was so horrific to think this is like how the legacy of whatever it is just insane. And of course, this wasn't just like the research was centered in Germany, but this was happening in many, like the different European, like people from different European countries were doing this. So it wasn't just Germans, it was the British, the French, the Portuguese, like anyone who could get a machete or some sword who could do the hacking of someone's head could do this and bring to sell. So it was a very dark period that it's not just, perhaps it's not just a German legacy in a way. It's a wider European thing, I think. They just happen to be housed here, so in some way it's really hard to know where they come from. But I guess the sort of the spiritual aspect of this thing really intrigues me, because in most of, at least in my culture, there is like when you bury, and there is like where you bury, and the way that your community is able to connect with you in the afterlife. It's really important for many people. So I started being curious about that. Maybe what happens if the spirits are sort of not honored, and so I wanted to write a story that centers the spiritual aspect of it. But I also maybe wanted to write it not necessarily based in the land where then the spirit the human remains aren't. So I stand the gaze towards Germany where these human remains are, and from my understanding, they're not in a way honored. They're just stored in some basements of some museums. They're not like, there's no reverence to them. They're just there, and they don't know what to do with them. Probably, I don't know. My assumption. I have never spoken to the people who deal with it, but I feel like for the families, this is everything to them. Like, we really want to get our people back, and then there are families who have no idea that where their people were taken to. So there's this whole thing. So the story that I want to write is basically a vengeful spirit that comes to destroy Berlin. That's the story.
Okay,
It's not a
okay.
nice story.
Well, this is something to look out for then.
Yeah.
Well, as we have come to the end of our conversation, dear Neema, Komba, there's some concluding remarks that you want to bring in.
Concluding remarks. Well, I have a question for you. What do you think could be done before I conclude? I think this is like, you've been looking at you've been talking to a lot of different people and sort of paying attention to what the German government is currently doing. But what do you think could be done? How can we, bringing the question back to you, I guess, in a way, what do you think could be possibilities for doing better as a collective?
Well, within Germany, I think we have a lot of work to do from bottom up, starting in local environments where it's happening. There are a lot of groups now all over Germany that work on the colonial entanglements of their local environment. It's very interesting, very relevant work. And then, of course, we have to bring it up to the national level. And one big project that we are active on at the moment is to push the government that they would create a national memorial site on colonialism, which would also act as a learning space where people could come and find out more and study the colonial past, but also the colonial continuities. And this, of course, goes along with the very important work we have to do also, I myself, to work on the sort of the racist mindset that we have been socialized in, and challenge the whole notion of white supremacy. So these are huge agendas, I know. And to make this happening, or we would need to exchange and have conversations with people from the former colonies. So that's why I'm so grateful that you take the time and you've come to Germany. And out of this, I hope we'll develop some common understanding of how to address this very painful past from very different vantage points and perspectives, and see if we can, out of this, weave a new story of collaboration and collaborative efforts for a different kind of a new, how Benedict Savoy and fellow Sarr have called for a new ethics of relationships between the colonizers, former colonizers, and former colonized societies. So what's your final thought on this issue?
I think it goes beyond colonization, and it goes beyond past relations. I think it's about how do humans relate to each other and to the earth and the world at large. It's a mindset of extraction that has brought us to this point, I think. And in some ways, we continue to honor the same systems that caused this colonization to get to the level that it did, that continues to cause genocides. And I think there is a need to change that sort of core essence of who we are and how we relate and everything, and what systems are given precedence in a way. And I think that I think it comes from like my sort of maybe being sort of raised by some educators that education is important, but what we teach is as important as just is what we teach, and how we teach is just as important, because like sure you can educate people, but make them better at extraction rather than at preservation and honor and respect for the world that keeps us in a way. And so you could still make very good extractors, and that's still education. But what are we educating? You could educate people to be more racist, more believe in more like supremacy of one race over the other, instead of teaching them that we're all common. We have a common human race, and we are intertwined and interdependent. You could teach one thing or the other. So it's for me that changing what we teach and what we honor would change the world in a great way. So I hope that's where we're heading, because whatever we did in the past we cannot fix, but we can fix what we are now and what we can be in the future.
So Neema Komba, thank you very much for this meaningful conversation.
Thank you.